Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Richard Costello, and today I'm pleased to introduce Nic Paolella. Nic Paolella is the Vice President of Development at Marcon, responsible for leading all new development projects. As part of the second generation of his family's real estate development firm, Nic is helping build on the success of the company's 35 years and 12,286 homes to date. Nic is passionate about urban planning and design and aims to create better, more livable communities. Nic has a BCom with a real estate specialism from UBC and is actively involved with UDI as board member and past chair of the Under 40 committee. Nic, a big welcome to you and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rich.
So Nic, I asked most people about their early influences and how they got into real estate. Now, you truly did grow up in the business. So I'm wondering, what are some of your earlier memories of life as a home builder's son?
Well, I can't picture a time where we weren't living in some sort of state of construction, even within our own backyard. And I don't think that's changed. I don't think that's changed in my family as long as I've been around. So it's constantly a state of projects, and it's amazing how much you sponge in as a kid growing up in an environment like that, because it was more than just knowing what your parents did or hearing dinner table conversations, but literally it was as much of my dad's quote unquote day job as it was. Building was just a thing he loved doing, and being busy building, whether that was the day-to-day work or whether it was building barns on our farm or whatever. And so it was really embedded into our world.
Well, what can you tell us about Marcon and what is your role within the business?
So Marcon, as you noted, we're a company that's been around for a few decades. My dad started in 1985, and we started as a construction company in the Valley. As urban development started occurring out there in the Fraser Valley, my dad was able to capitalize on some opportunities construction-wise with developers who were looking for opportunities out in the Valley. Often they were based in Vancouver. And funny enough, the builders that they were working with were located in the city, and most of their employees worked somewhere. They worked and lived in the Burnaby, Vancouver, Tri-City area. Oddly, the labor pool was not really readily available at scale in the Valley because it wasn't where growth was happening. And of course, the affordability dynamics of the region hadn't necessarily taken place yet. And so it was actually for groups that were trying to grow out in the Fraser Valley, they actually had to go find builders who were familiar with how to get things done in that area. So my dad capitalized on those opportunities as they presented themselves with developers who were looking for construction support. And we went down that path for many years. And then those relationships really just flourished and took us into every other part of the region. And then with that, my dad was always quite keen on development opportunities that were not necessarily as direct as being on the front line, but we were supporting the financings of projects. We were partners, and it had always been a kind of a part of our DNA. We develop and build income properties, but then more purposely over time, development became part of our workflow, and we were capitalizing on opportunities generated ourselves, and again started in the Valley. We did a couple thousand homes out there in development before anybody knew who we were, and then we started to branch into other parts of the region and in higher density forms, etc. So that's our story, and we're just continuing to be opportunistic and grow as we're able to. And my role is diving deep into the weeds of all aspects of that development activity we have, as well as the overarching kind of corporate strategy and direction of where we lead our group of companies as a whole.
So on the company website, you say that starting out as a construction company has made us a better developer. So while this might sound like an obvious question, why do you think this is the case?
I think the grittiest and most sensitive point of the development process can be in construction. If you don't understand the nuances of construction and just the practical realities of how things happen and the stumbling blocks you're going to hit no matter how hard you really try, what you get good at is understanding how to deal with the unforeseen and how to look around the corner and even account for unforeseen. You know, you don't know what you don't know, but going in with that assumption is really helpful. And it allows you to dial in a margin of error or contingency that feels appropriate. And then you can approach opportunities on the development end with less trepidation. And so for us, that's been a really exciting thing. Like, because of our construction scale and diversity, we've been able to go tackle development opportunities without any fear that the execution aspect of construction is going to be an issue for us. And that's often something that, you know, people have. If all you've been doing is building townhomes and low-rise, and now you're looking to build towers, the biggest question you have is not how you're going to get it approved and how you're going to sell it. It's likely we don't know anything about how to build a tower. And if you don't know anything about construction, then you're going to be relying on a contractor and, you know, consultants to help you wade outside of your comfort zone. And so for us, we've been able to cross these hurdles with that construction expertise built in, often the experience having already done it, and allows us to really leverage that into exploring development opportunities and asset classes that aren't immediately in our lane.
Thinking about all of the projects that you've been involved with so far, is there one that stands out that you're most proud of?
There's obviously projects we've done. I've experienced with that really range in complexity, and I think complexity at all the different levels is actually one of the most exciting ones. Measuring the success can be nebulous, right? But for me, I take a project like our Clark and Como development in Coquitlam as one that resonates as pretty interesting on a lot of levels. It was, you know, it was the tallest building in that municipality at 50 floors, and the, you know, kind of significant departure in scale from as, you know, going east than what had been done in the past, and moving into a new area, high density transit area. We had SkyTrain passing literally over the tip of our property. We with that project, there's a 14-story rental building as well, and that we leveraged. We were the first to leverage emerging policy that Coquitlam had in basically a rental incentives, allowing that forum to be created with zoning policies that allowed for additional density with rental tenure. And then, of course, you have mixed use complexities. The parkade is 8 levels deep. I think it's the deepest parkade outside of Vancouver. And all of these things present different challenges. And then there was the unique side of selling that project, where we had 6,000 people through the sales center in 30 days. 3,000 people came back at the end of 30 days with unit request forms, filled out, scanned driver's licenses. We had 10 times the demand for the supply that we had in that project. And then you're in the strange position of, like, obviously getting excited about the take up and success, and obviously good market timing. But then you have to deal with the letdown and disappointment of literally thousands of people, and not just investors. We're talking about in many cases, end users, people who just weren't able to get access to housing. So that, you know, goes to show, when the market pressures are really there, how acute the housing supply issue was. It's a different scenario today, but it was pretty interesting to go through. So that's in recent years, that's been a great project to be a part of.
Nic, how would you describe the company culture at Marcon?
Really, the culture is built off the foundation of the history of our company with people who have been with us for over 30 years. and going into a second generation of this company, not just second generation within family and ownership, but second generation within the workforce, where we have people who started with us 30 plus years ago, and then their kids now working for us, and it's exciting. So it's this great juxtaposition of strong values. They exude themselves without it being forced, and then this youthful energy that is help driving a new chapter. That's this great space that we get to wade through, and you feel the dimensions of that push and pull, which I think balances quite nicely in people rounding out their just getting gratification out of their working with the team, but also being able to wrestle with challenges and being able to kind of take the best of both of those kind of cultures and ways of thinking and apply that to the challenges of the day.
How do you go about maintaining this culture?
Well, I'm largely of the mind of not trying to force culture to happen. Of course, we do overtly, we try to do all kinds of things to promote a wonderful working environment. And I'm probably short selling all of the things that goes into what we do on a regular basis. It's been a really good ride with our team. And I think there's lots of different levers we've pulled, from building CrossFit gyms in our office with trainers and promoting healthy lifestyle to, dealing with the ups and downs of people's lives. If one of the things I find is, everybody's going to have different things that push and pull them beyond their work life over the balance of their career. And so the way they work, the hours they can put in, the kids' sports games that they can't miss, whatever that is, they ebb and flow. And we respect that, and we want people to enjoy being here with us every day. We want people to hopefully enjoy working with the team, but we're not forcing it. We're not forcing it.
So I want to move on to talk about, I guess, your job as a development manager. A big part of this podcast is to educate our listeners as to the different career opportunities within the industry. So for anyone listening that might be unfamiliar, what is the main role of a development manager?
Well, firstly, it's the best job in all of the development process. So I'm just going to show my bias right off the bat. That role is really interesting. A development manager can come from many different paths, and most of the time, not business school. There's a lot. The skill sets that you need as an effective development manager, in my view, are mostly soft. Obviously, you need to cover all the bases in being analytical. You care about detail, and you have great communication skills. But that's born out of, that's just a dimension you'll have no matter what path of education that you go down. And really what you are signing up for as a development manager is being the shepherd of a project from start to finish. And in that, there's a lot of, it's very rewarding because you get to understand all elements of the business. At the same time, it puts a lot of, to be successful at this, it puts a lot of accountability on a development manager to really deeply care about the outcome of a project, even though sometimes your immediate efforts aren't as noticeable. And that, in fact, success of a development manager is really the byproduct of seeing success in a bunch of different areas all come together, and you're proud of handing over keys to new homeowners or turning over buildings to tenants, whatever. That, all things considered, work out well. It's not a role with clear wins and losses. It's really keeping things on the rails. For us, development managers, we particularly put attention to the city approval process. That if there's one role where the development manager really owns, it's that. I think gone are the days generally where architects are driving the bus on getting you through the process. I mean, I would say most developers in this industry know that. Sometimes newer entrants get a bit misguided and letting the consulting team drive the bus in that stage of the game. It's just there's just too much muck and requires constant attention back to the stakeholders for an intermediary to really take that position well. So for us, we've really put an emphasis on our development managers being most effective in the approval process and putting the majority of their attention there. It's an area with a lot of complexity and a lot of risk. And so I think we've developed a culture and a headspace around development management, which is a little different than other groups. Probably surprising how much attention to detail we end up putting into the front end of projects, and how and the really small nuances to working through the approval process. Like, you have no idea how many times I've reviewed single sentences that we're sending to planners for review. Sometimes it comes down to that. It really comes down to, what is my message? Am I communicating it right? I really want the person to understand me, because most of the time in the friction of working through an approval process, it's often how the information is landing with people, how they're receiving it, tends to be the majority of the time. People can find themselves, can find common ground, but often it's kind of the principle. And we want to be the chameleons. We don't want to wear a badge of free enterprise, or position on supply and demand, or housing affordability issues, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I think sometimes what happens is it gets wired into our system as the developer, and then the way we communicate gets received by groups that are assuming the worst, and we want to try to rewrite that script a bit. And who knows if it's working, I guess, but we think it is. And so development management for us is this process where we're looking for really thoughtful people who are not bringing any ego to the table, roll up their sleeves to do the work needed, sometimes in the shadows of all of the other activity that gets more attention in a project, and really establishing great relationships with the city and making sure that what we're saying makes sense and that it's communicated well, and hopefully it just builds better relationships in all the places we're working.
Are you ready to find the best next hire to join your real estate business? Highview is committed to finding the best talent to fit your hiring needs. Our team specialize in recruiting at all levels, from coordinators, analysts, and operators to managers, directors, and vice presidents. Contact us today or visit us at highviewpartners.ca/employers.
All right, well, moving on. So I want to talk about a couple of themes that you've written about as I was doing my research. So in 2015, you featured in a Globe and Mail article titled "Foreign Buyers Snatch Vancouver Land with No Immediate Plan to Develop." So the argument was that speculators backed by overseas capital were overpaying for houses to form land assemblies and then sitting on the sites as a way to preserve capital versus developing them. So reducing housing supply coming to the market as a result. So we're 5 years on from that article. So what has changed since then, if anything?
Well, we got a lot busier and I stopped answering media interviews. Didn't have time for it anymore. But that's an interesting topic. And actually, interesting you're asking that question in 2020. I think, 2015 to 2017, 2015 to 2019, 2015 to 2020, I think it's now 5 years, is the first time you can start to materially see the outcomes of this type of speculation. And it's because we've just gone through a hard year. The market, as it should, I guess, acting naturally, clears out companies that aren't materializing results. And I think this is very evident in this market as it relates to a lot of the foreign development speculation that's occurred. There was such a rush of groups back into 2015, 2016, paying record pricing for land. A small handful of these groups had made it through successfully, driven by like every other group, established group here in the Lower Mainland, like really doing the work and pushing hard to get through approval process and into market. It's a slug. It's not sexy work. and you can't sit on the sidelines or just hire a bunch of consultants. I think this is a big one. Is you can't just hire a bunch of consultants to do the job, right? I think there's a lot of these groups came in thinking they could hire the person to get them approved, hire the person to get them sold, hire the builder, and it will happen. It's so much more. There's so many nuances to this in Metro Vancouver because it's a particularly challenging place to get things done. So what occurred was big land buys. People effectively, like I said back then, holding up supply. We were so worried about foreign purchasers coming in to the market and sapping up individual condo supply, where you can't even put a candle to what one developer who buys even a single family home in a land assembly that holds up that assembly, which is hundreds of units of supply. And so a lot of these groups, they got financed at the time because the land market was moving. They often got secondary sources of financing, like expensive money. And then they had 2 to 3 years in their land loan terms to try to make something happen. And not all of these groups, there was a lot of the time, there's this big talk about these groups being like really serious heavyweight groups financially coming in with billions of dollars. And that was, again, few and far between. There were certainly some, but like a lot of groups were coming in. They might be worth billions back wherever their money originated, but they're not able to get billions here or hundreds of millions here. And so they stretched to get as much cash into this market as they could. They got financing, which was at the time available, and then tried to push projects forward, all the while that supply is not entering the market. Then came late 2017, 2018, the radical shift in the condo market that affected land pricing significantly, so much so that land prices of 2016 in some of those purchases happening in 2015 to 2017 are lower today than they were then. Leaves groups that have now extinguished their land loan terms that they got from secondary lenders who may not actually be lending anymore, and in a market where the primary groups are certainly not going to be lending in all likelihood to new entrants, and it puts those groups in a tough position. And we've seen through the course of 2020 a number of instances where some of these foreign land speculators are liquidating their land holdings for, in some cases, flat or lower than what they purchased them for back in 2015, 2016, 2017. It's unfortunate that part of the wake of what caused the change of the market in 2017, 2018 was provincial government policy driven by, a lot of things having to do to mitigate foreign investment, foreign ownership in housing and whatnot. And I think actually at its highest level, a pretty wise move to try to attempt to moderate housing affordability by ensuring that external factors aren't driving that. I think what happened was largely fear took people out of the market because it was moving so fast. And the policy, and it wasn't actually steering foreign home buyers away. Meanwhile, for 3-4 years, we had thousands of units of supply soaked up by groups that were just holding land. And then now, we're seeing that same land coming back into the market because those groups haven't been able to execute and can't afford to sit on their land.
That's very interesting. Thanks for the explanation and update from that article. All right. Well, another topic that that you wrote about when you had a bit more time on your hands is gentle densification. So that's the idea of introducing growth into more single family areas, which is obviously one way of increasing the options for middle income families who want to stay and live closer to the city. So maybe you can tell us about your experience with this and what are the opportunities and perhaps the challenges associated with it?
The opportunities, they should be more abundant than they are. Ironically, you have the convergence of views both from the industry looking for new ways to bring supply of housing to the market, trying to find ways for gentle densification to occur, aka not being forced just to compete on land opportunities along arterial roads, but more, get deeper into, traditionally single family home neighborhoods and start bringing moderate density in those locations. You also have, from a community level, a groundswell of people, especially younger people, who want to grow up in communities that have similar characteristics and values to what they grew up with, but they can't find themselves any opportunity to be in a single family home. Then there's just limited options left. And there's a lot of potential for densification to come into, I mean, huge proportions of the region. I think where it is a challenge still is Vancouver, especially east and west side Vancouver. So, and I think that's where probably the topic is the hottest. East Vancouver struggles. They are lower land prices, but they struggle from smaller lots, much smaller lot assemblies, and so you're paying for a lot more in terms of improvement of home value as much as you are for land. And pound for pound, it's actually quite challenging relative to for what you can ultimately build and what you have to pay for land. That it's a tough equation, and so sometimes you're looking at what's the threshold of like what amount of density would be necessary to make the land more valuable than the single family homes that are there. Surprisingly, in the east side, you can't just automatically jump to, say, townhomes and make that equation work. And on the west side, similarly, it's a struggle because the lots are bigger, which is helping you in your land equation. But of course, just the values of the west side themselves are up. And then you look at the situation where you go into like townhome form in the west side of Vancouver, and there's no such thing as an affordable, like a truly affordable townhome going into the west side of Vancouver in the future. They just to cover the value of a single family home today in your land cost is going to push you to either an expensive townhome or needing more than that kind of density to swing that. And this is where it gets wacky because townhome, you're going to have an expensive townhome, and I'd argue that it's better to have a $1.5 million townhome than a $5 million, 4 $1.5 million townhomes versus one $5 million home. So it's not really truly affordable, but it's a lot better than where we were in terms of land utilization. But you can see people lamenting that it's not accessible, and that's true. Then you go to 4-story, you go to 4-story product, and then you end up in that same situation where, for the size, for what you're paying for, these homes are generally trending towards larger, and they're trending towards downsizer purchasers moving into large condos in middle density areas. And so you need to push a little bit more than that to finally get to an equation where you can create modest scale homes that will, once you resolve the whole cost base issue, you get to a price point that people can afford. And so missing middle or gentle density sits in this realm of, depending on where you are, it's not as simple as just having these ground-oriented walk-ups. It's a little more than that, but it can be done I think it can be done really tastefully. I think there's successful outcomes that can be achieved. And it opens a door up for a quality of life, which I think a lot of people have been frustrated by having to make serious compromises, moving much further away from the core of the region to be able to get some of those attributes of family-oriented housing and space that they simply can't achieve closer to the core and not in the way that they grew up in.
It's definitely an interesting topic. And I think gentle densification done tastefully, as you say, has a lot of potential in some areas of the city. Okay, well, moving on, Nic, I want to ask you about finding inspiration. Outside of your immediate family, has there been any one person who has had an inspiring impact on your life?
One person in particular outside of my family who's been really instrumental is, for people listening who are in this industry, that Bryce Rossich. He's an architect who's been in the industry for many years. My dad's known him for 35, 36 years. He added a dimension to, he continues to add a dimension to my perspective regularly on challenging all kinds of norms, depth of thought, and continuing to be curious about elements of the work we do and life living in a city that I probably wouldn't have otherwise crossed, things I wouldn't have crossed in my headspace without some prodding there. And what's really fun about that is in the case of my relationship with him, he saw me crawling, and now we work together and challenge each other regularly. And that experience has been wonderful. And there's other people who have offered a similar dimension. I think huge hats off to my parents, who really had really deep relationships with people. And my dad largely in the workspace. Like he's never interested in the shallow level of a business relationship or shallow level kind of interaction. You do this, I do that. It's with anybody, no matter what part of our business. My dad always really had an enjoyment for getting to know people and really befriending them. And so as kids, it was what a huge thing for us kids, is that we just had this wonderful social circle and group of people who cared enough to share their world with us. And of course, being that was in the same work world that I'm in now, what it really meant is got a huge leg up on the relationships and a huge leg up on perspective from people who have lived and breathed what we do for decades. And so there's lots of people like Bryce and others who have offered that great kind of mentorship over the years.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing, Nic. And thinking about your role, how do you define success in your job?
Personally, for me, it's about potential. It's not a monetary outcome. It's not any individual or specific win. Success to me is really about when, however many years from now, at the end of the day, do you look at the road you've gone down, and can you say that you put everything you had on the table and appreciated life along the way. And so, we all get used to, you run on a treadmill, you start on a treadmill, you run at whatever speed 1, speed 2, you get used to it, and then you keep picking up on the treadmill. And then eventually you're running, 5 times faster than where you started, and you're doing it for long periods of time. And the challenge is as much as it was when you started at a lot slower pace. To me, that's the potential element. For me, I don't really care what speed of the treadmill I land on. It's not about that. It's not being the king of my universe. It's of any sort. It's really, have we done everything we can to make use of the cards that we've been dealt, and that's success, and that's the results. Like even success, measuring success on projects. If we've had great financial success, but we haven't delivered a good product to our buyers or done right by our partners, then we're not achieving success. If we don't have that appetite to think about what we could do better next time as we go into the next project, nothing's perfect. If you lose that desire or fire to want to continue to tinker away and improve, then I think you're not. Then I don't think you're demonstrating success. So yeah, that's what gets me out of bed every morning.
And what about advice for anyone starting out in the real estate industry? What pearls of wisdom would you have?
I think on the outside, development looks a lot hotter than the real work is, and it probably is true for a lot of industries. Don't go watch Suits and decide you want to be a lawyer. To be successful in this industry, it's really got to start from wanting to work. If you think that success in this industry is going to come by way of Cactus Club lunches and networking, I think you're going to be sorely mistaken. That culture is even fading even more. Like I've noticed in the last few years, but I think it really's got to come back, like a genuine intent to want to bring as much of your mental capacity to the table and apply that productively and really work and like address the problem, like be willing to be a problem solver day in, day out, no matter what side of the business you're on. Development companies generally, they're not mega corporations, right? Even the largest developers in this city or even across Canada, like unless you're working for a pension fund, private development company, they're big companies. And so there's an entrepreneurial bent to almost every role within the companies. And especially when they're privately owned, there's a different pulse, pace and energy and intensity that gets applied. In some cases, a bit of ego too, which you've got to be careful for. You've really got to be careful of. So I think it's work ethic, it's a keen interest in problem solving, and then really look carefully, I think, about not just company culture, but look at leadership in a company. I think the biggest advice I can give to people looking to go in this industry or grow in this industry is don't just look at the environment, your immediate peer environment, or the track record of a company, or just the fact that they're big, or that the market likes the brand. I think you really got to look at and do some due diligence on how good are the decision makers. Are they contemporary? Are they experienced? Do they have ego? Do they have success solving problems? And what are you going to gain from that, working in that environment? I think a lot of that will shape your career success. I think is largely driven by the choices that get made at a company level, and in development, it's typically choices are usually made by a very small number of people in a company. And so I think that's the underrepresented part of making a choice of who you want to work for. It's kind of unique to development. So I think people need to look at that carefully and then make their choice about how they want to step through their career.
Great advice. Thank you. Okay, well, moving towards our close here, what about your passions outside of work? What are they?
I didn't know people had passions outside of work. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that I have a lot of energy and an interest in this subject matter. So there's no shortage of it in outside of being in the office. But for me, I try to be healthy, get outside, and really take advantage of this wonderful city. And so I find myself, pretty broad in interests. I like to absorb it all. And again, it's one of those things like just take advantage of the cards you're dealt. So if you're living in a great environment and there's pastimes and social stuff you can do, then do it. And so I tend to embrace it all. And I play music. I grew up playing piano, and I still do that quite a lot. It's a great way for me to clear my head. And otherwise, I just try to get out and take in the world in all kinds of ways. And I don't have really a singular bent on anything. Balance. I think enough to keep your head clear, enough to stay healthy and keep your head clear is what I really try to aim for, whatever that is in the season.
Yeah, we're pretty lucky to have the 4 seasons to enjoy on the West Coast. And I think it's really good to mix things up. All right, Nic, listen, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's been great to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.